Destiny Renee Pittman. On January 9, 1992, Destiny Renee Pittman was born in Kokomo, Indiana, to Melvin Douglas and Carla Pittman McCombs. Destiny has 2 brothers and 2 sisters, making 5 total. At the age of 21, Destiny stayed at 815 James Drive, Kokomo, with her 3 pets, 2 little children, her boyfriend, and a female roommate in 2013. Destiny's home was broken into by 2 armed attackers on the evening of February 7, 2013. Reaching out into the hallway from her bedroom, Destiny confronted the intruders. She was then fatally shot by one of the attackers. The bullet went through her chest and struck a wall at the end of the hall. Renee's boyfriend, roommate, children, and dogs were at home at the time, but hid away out of fear and were unharmed. At approximately 9:33 p.m., officers from the Kokomo Police Department were dispatched to 815 James Drive when they were notified about shots being fired at the residence. When officers arrived at the crime scene, Destiny was already gone and there was nothing they could do to revive her. A single .40 caliber shell casing was recovered. Neither her boyfriend, whose name was never disclosed, or roommate saw the intruders and could thus not give investigators any description. It was suspected that the perpetrators may have been looking to rob Destiny and her boyfriend of marijuana and cash they had from selling weed. Destiny's boyfriend reportedly admitted to police that he sold marijuana and had taken a bag containing weed and over $2,000 in cash to another house just days prior to the home invasion. Both the boyfriend and the roommate also admitted to police that Destiny too was involved in selling, but had not as much since she inherited money. Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Unfortunately, investigators were unable to identify the attackers and the case went cold. For more than 10 years, Destiny's case remained unsolved without a single suspect ever being identified. Destiny's demise left her surviving family and friends devastated. Even years after, her mom stayed depressed and cried a lot. "I hope and pray to God someone will have something to say," she said. "My life has turned absolutely upside down. They took my child for no reason. Whoever it was, I hope they are satisfied. They did not get anything out of it. She was just getting ready to start modeling and have a life for herself." Her mother said not knowing who did this to her daughter or why eats at her each and every day. On March 2, 2023, 2 men were finally identified as suspects in Destiny Pittman's case. Investigators announced the arrest of 32-year-old Joey McCartney and 36-year-old Jesse McCartney. Joey McCartney was taken into custody by U.S. Marshals at the crack of dawn at a residence in Graham, Kentucky. Jesse McCartney was arrested by U.S. Marshals and local police roughly 2 hours later at a residence in Kokomo. Graham and Kokomo are more than a 4-hour drive apart. As a result of the continued investigation since 2013, along with citizens continuing to provide leads, investigators with the Criminal Investigation Section were able to determine that these 2 individuals were responsible for what happened to Destiny. On December 5, 2022, a woman called in and claimed to have information about Destiny's case. She told police she could not keep this information to herself anymore after repeatedly seeing press releases on the case over the years. According to the court documents, this informant claimed to have been with Jesse McCartney on the night Destiny's life was ended and had been sitting in his white Jeep Cherokee outside Destiny's home. According to the informant, Jesse and Joey said they were running an errand, which the individual reportedly believed meant a deal that involved illegal substances. Jesse reportedly told the informant to stay inside the vehicle while he proceeded to put on black leather gloves and grabbed his handgun. Joey McCartney met Jesse at Destiny's front door before the pair entered the residence. The 2 of them then started searching the home, which police believe it was for substances that Destiny and her boyfriend were selling. The informant heard a gunshot and saw both men come running out of the house. Jesse was sweating heavily and had a large bag of marijuana and cash in his hand, according to the informant. She alleges that she and Jesse drove back to his apartment and Joey joined them. She said Jesse then made her drive back by the home the next day. When they drove past, there was police tape surrounding the house. The informant also told police about Jesse McCartney changing his phone number and said he still lived in Kokomo on Monroe Street. She said he sold his gun and Jeep 6 months later after the crime was committed. The woman told investigators she did not come forward sooner because she was scared, and still is. She had an alleged history with Jesse. Police showed Destiny's boyfriend photographs of Joey and Jesse McCartney after the new revelations. The boyfriend stated that Joey looked familiar and might have visited before with a common friend, but it was still unclear to investigators whether Destiny knew the McCartneys. The two men are accused of both burglary and killing Destiny. Jesse McCartney was also charged with possessing illicit narcotics and robbery. Due to their purported involvement in the case, the brothers were detained without release, and their hearing is scheduled for March 2023. On August 11, 2023, Jesse McCartney went on trial. It was found that he was not the person who shot Destiny, so he was cleared of part of the charges. The trial for Joey McCartney has not yet begun. Moving on to the next case. Meline Beth McCann. The disappearance of Meline Beth McCann has garnered the greatest media attention of any missing person case in contemporary history. Over the nearly 16 years after her disappearance, numerous explanations have been proposed. Many think it's the fault of her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, or their pals. Some others were certain Robert Moret was complicit. He resided in Praia de Luz, Portugal, around 150 yards from apartment 5A, where Meline was last seen in 2007. Other than conflicting statements made by him, there was nothing linking him to the disappearance. A series of burglaries that took place near apartment 5A in the days before Meline went missing was then focused on. A group of men pretending to collect donations for an orphanage as a ploy to gain access to homes in the area, nothing concrete was found that any of these men took Meline. In June of 2020, it seemed like the mystery was finally solved. Police in Germany ordered an inquiry regarding the possible involvement of then 43-year-old Christian Bruckner. He was in the same area at the time, and he gave investigators false statements. German authorities claim that they have concrete evidence that Christian Bruckner took Medeline's life, but they have not made all the information public, and it appears that the investigation is still ongoing. These, of course, are not all of the theories, but it does bring us to the most recent one, Julia Wendell. In February of 2023, a Polish woman, Julia Wendell, came forward stating that she believed she might be Meline. There have been quite a few women that have claimed they are Meline, so it wasn't big news at first. Now, let's go over everything we know about Julia and why she believes that she is, in fact, Meline. Julia grew up in Ratclove, Poland. Here is a picture of her taken during her childhood, next to a picture of Meline. She claims that she does not remember large parts of her childhood, and that she was never treated as part of the family by her parents or siblings. Other quote-unquote evidence she has put forward includes a speck in her eye, like Meline, and her allegedly overhearing her mom admit to taking her. Where it gets really interesting is she also said she was abused by a German man who resembled a one-time suspect in Medeline's disappearance. She supposedly found a family photo of that man in an older relative's house. I couldn't find any information if she's referring to Christian Bruckner or not. A private detective working on the case in Poland said that they could find no hospital records for Julia relating to the first 5 years of her life. Julia's family in Poland have denied her claims. Her mom and dad have also blocked Julia's number and are refusing to take DNA tests of their own. Julia received many death threats after she went viral on Instagram, sharing that she believed she is Meline. Julia then went to California for her own safety. Julia is staying with a private detective and self-professed medium doctor, Fia Johansson, at a safe house in California. Dr. Johansson said Julia has sent off 3 DNA samples for forensic analysis, as well as a genetic test to establish her ancestry. If the results come back that she's British or from that area, then we are going to continue our investigation into Madeleine McCann and communicate with the detectives in Portugal, Dr. Johansson said. We have a lot of evidence right now that shows Julia was definitely trafficked to Poland. We are still conducting an investigation, but Julia is definitely not the biological daughter of her parents in Poland. Dr. Johansson also said it was so strange because everything in Julia's health book, everything, started at the age of 5. So everything between the ages of 0 months to 5 years, everything is missing, and there is no signature by a doctor showing that they had removed any of the records from her file. She just doesn't exist during that time frame. Online users have also conjectured that Wendell might be the 6-year-old twin of Olivia Schlepp, a Swiss child who vanished in 2011 together with her twin. I intend to create a new video when the DNA test results are released because this is still an ongoing project. In the meantime, kindly share your opinions with me in the comments area. Is Madeleine actually Julia? Maybe Julia Wendell, or just another lost woman? Moving on to the next case. Natalie Cochran. Originally from West Virginia, a state renowned for its close-knit towns and breathtaking natural beauty, Natalie Cochran is a registered pharmacist. There, she established herself and had what appeared to be a typical life with her husband, Michael Cochran. It appeared as though Natalie and Michael were leading a serene life, but that tranquility was dramatically upended when Michael inexplicably and suddenly died on February 11th, 2019. The collapse of a Ponzi scheme and growing accusations that suggested Natalie's role in her husband's death may have been more complex and evil than first thought catapulted her into the public eye later that year. Federal prosecutors accused Natalie Cochran and her late husband, Michael, of running a financial hoax in a civil case they filed against her in July 2019. The Cochrans were the owners of 2 companies, Tactical Solutions Group and Technological Management Studios. They purportedly led investors to believe that Tactical held government contracts to supply semi-automatic weapons to various defense agencies, including the U.S. Department of Defense. These allegations mark the start of a complex legal saga. According to the civil lawsuit, the Cochrans deceived investors by making them believe in the legitimacy of their government contracts. In total, both companies raised at least $25,800,000 from 11 investors. Investors were promised significant returns on their investments, but the truth was vastly different. U.S. Attorney Mike Stewart revealed that Tactical did not possess any government contracts for semi-automatic weapons. Instead, the Cochrans allegedly spent investors' money on lavish living, expensive dining, and other personal expenses. Tactical made donations to various local organizations, including Shady Spring Middle School's football department and the Shady Spring Youth Baseball League. They also donated semi-automatic weapons as bingo prizes at a fundraiser held at Shady Spring High School. This fundraiser raised over $32,000, with half of the proceeds going to Shady Spring High Volleyball and the other half to the Shady Spring Youth Baseball League, for which Natalie served as treasurer. Despite the significant donations, questions began to emerge about the legitimacy of the funds. The league board member, James Quessenberry, revealed that Tactical's check for $16,780 bounced, and numerous unauthorized withdrawals were made from the league account. An internal audit was conducted to investigate financial records. As the legal scrutiny intensified, Natalie filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in July. Her bankruptcy filings revealed that she had minimal income and assets. She claimed to have less than $600 in bank accounts and a staggering $1,400,000 in liabilities. The allegations against the Cochrans prompted federal and state investigations into their business dealings. It was reported that investors received letters on a U.S. Department of Defense letterhead assuring them that their returns on investment would be available at a later date. Natalie maintained that much of the information related to the investments was classified and could not be discussed. Natalie claimed in a creditors' meeting that federal agents and West Virginia State Police had frozen her bank accounts, rendering her unable to pay her creditors. On February 11, 2019, Natalie's husband and business partner Michael Cochran passed away at Bowers Hospice House 5 days after supposedly hitting his head during a seizure. The circumstances surrounding Michael's end prompted authorities to investigate further. Reports emerged that Michael had been hospitalized multiple times in the months preceding due to an unspecified illness. A government official in Raleigh County disclosed that West Virginia State Police were looking into the case. In a startling development, a judicial order was executed in early September, leading to the exhumation of Michael Cochran's body from Sunset Memorial Gardens. The copy of the judicial order was reportedly sealed, pending the close of both federal and state investigations into the circumstances surrounding his tragic fate. Natalie maintained that her husband's passing was a result of an accidental fall that caused him to hit his head during a seizure. She asserted that Michael was transported to the hospital 20 minutes after his fall and denied any involvement in what had happened to him. However, there were conflicting reports regarding the timeline of events and the presence of other adults in the house during the critical hours preceding Michael's hospitalization. In November 2021, Natalie found herself facing a first-degree charge for taking the life of her husband. By then, Natalie was already serving an 11-year federal prison sentence related to the Ponzi scheme, which further fueled speculation about her involvement in Michael's end. The proceedings took an unexpected turn during a hearing in a Raleigh County courtroom. Natalie appeared in the courtroom wearing a brown skirt, khaki-colored pants, and shackles on her hands. Members of her family, including her 2 teenage children, were present. In a surprising move, the prosecution decided to drop the charge against Natalie. The reason cited was the need for more time to gather evidence. The prosecution's decision was a strategic one aimed at allowing for a re-examination of Michael's body. Raleigh County prosecuting attorney Ben Hatfield made the motion to dismiss the charge, stating how vital the re-examining of the body would be to the case. Hatfield further clarified that he had consulted Michael's family before formally requesting the exhumation. The decision to re-examine the body was not taken lightly, as Hatfield sought an expert's opinion to ensure that the examination would yield viable scientific evidence. Hatfield's request was rooted in the need for a specialized test that could detect insulin levels in tissue samples. This test had not been conducted during the initial autopsy, which took place when Michael's body was first exhumed in September 2019. The absence of this specific test left room for uncertainty. According to Hatfield, it was extremely likely that he would re-indict Natalie for the slaying of her husband once the examination was complete. Natalie's defense attorneys did not object to the prosecution's motions, which raised curiosity about their strategy. Matthew Victor, one of Cochran's attorneys, revealed that this move would provide them with an opportunity to gather more evidence from the federal investigation. Their aim was to prove that Michael was aware of the Ponzi scheme, a revelation that, if true, could significantly impact the state's case. Despite the charge being dropped, Natalie still had several more years to serve in her federal sentence. This fact weighed into the decision to dismiss the charge. The goal was to conduct the necessary tests and gather more evidence while she served her federal sentence. Following the hearing, as she was escorted out of the courtroom by police, Natalie had a brief moment to speak with her family. In a poignant exchange, she expressed her love and bid farewell to her children. The parents of Michael Cochran were also present during the hearing. The latest development in the case of Natalie Cochran happened on October 24, 2023, when Raleigh County prosecuting attorney Ben Hatfield announced that a special grand jury had re-indicted Natalie and charged her with taking Michael's life. Following the exhumation of the body, a well-known forensic pathologist from Texas verified that Michael had been murdered and attributed it to the presence of unapproved exogenous insulin in his body. It is anticipated that Natalie Cochran will go to trial in 2024 and be found guilty of all the counts against her, because the special grand jury session is so late in its term. Moving on to the next case. Natasha Alex Carter. On December 22, 1989, Susan Gale Carter gave birth to Natasha Alex Carter. Her life was characterized by complicated family history that would be cruelly changed on August 8, 2000, when she and her 41-year-old mother, Susan, unexpectedly disappeared. Her loved ones knew her by her middle name, Alex. Natasha was born into a world of looming chaos and uncertainty, and her early years were marred by the turbulent custody dispute between her parents, Susan Gale Carter and Ricky Lafferty. Discord plagued the couple's relationship, which was made worse by Susan's refusal to take medicine for her bipolar disorder. But when Susan was discovered with other men, the relationship broke down, and she eventually developed a romantic involvement with the couple's landlord, Larry Del Webb. In 1998, Susan and Larry decided to get married, and thanks to Larry's influential connections, Susan managed to secure custody of Natasha despite her ongoing mental health challenges. What followed was a contentious and heated legal dispute between Susan and Ricky over the custody of their daughter, Natasha. The custody battle took a darker turn when, during a mediation meeting, Susan allegedly made ominous threats to Ricky Lafferty, promising that he would never see Natasha again. Susan failed to appear for the next hearing, and custody was granted to Ricky. On August 8, 2000, the course of Susan and Natasha's lives took an inexplicable turn when they vanished without leaving a trace. Natasha, who was a mere 10 years old at the time, had not been in contact with her father Ricky for several months leading up to her disappearance. When Ricky grew increasingly concerned and decided to reach out to Larry, Susan's new husband, to inquire about his daughter's whereabouts, he was met with a perplexing response. Larry, in his initial response, claimed that Susan and Natasha had left in the company of a man named Jose with the assurance that they would return shortly. However, just a few days later, Ricky made another anxious call to Larry only to be told a different story. This time, Larry stated that Susan and Natasha had left with a man named Manuel. The ever-changing names of the individuals added another layer of confusion to the mystery. Given Susan's remarks about making sure Ricky never sees his daughter again, investigators suspected that Susan had kidnapped Natasha herself. This suspicion was validated by Natasha's grandmother, who believed that she was afraid of her mother and did not want to live with her. In the wake of their disappearance, a felony warrant was issued for Susan Gale Carter on November 13, 2000, charging her with the kidnapping. The initial narrative categorized Natasha as the victim of a family abduction, speculating that she might be in the company of her mother and an adult male. There were also concerns that they might have crossed state lines, compounding the challenge of locating them. Over the years, the case has remained shrouded in mystery with no concrete leads or significant breakthroughs. Natasha's father, Ricky Lafferty, continued to hold on to hope that he would one day be reunited with his daughter. Despite the passage of 2 decades, the case was far from being forgotten or deemed unsolvable. Though the case received very little media attention, authorities remained committed to finding answers and ensuring justice for Natasha and her family. In 2021, the FBI elevated the reward offered for vital information that could potentially unveil the whereabouts of either Natasha or her mother Susan. That same year, law enforcement authorities revealed that Susan might also be operating under the alias Susan Gale Carter Webb. But with no progress in the case, investigators began to look at the possibility that what they once believed was a family abduction could have been a case of foul play. Susan Gale Carter, who was the prime suspect in Natasha's disappearance, was no longer the focus of the investigation. West Virginia State Police uncovered new evidence that indicated both Susan and Natasha mysteriously disappeared simultaneously. In a statement, West Virginia State Police said, this case was originally reported as Susan Carter kidnapping Natasha Carter. But over the course of this investigation, it has been determined that both Susan Carter and Natasha Carter are and have been missing since August 8, 2000. This revelation reshaped the entire narrative surrounding their disappearance. There was an unexpected twist in the case when West Virginia police zeroed in on Larry Del Webb's residence, 100 block of Kyle Lane, where Susan and Natasha were living during the time of their disappearances. In August 2023, the FBI initiated a thorough search of the property with the aim of uncovering evidence related to Natasha and Susan's disappearances. Webb, who is now in his 80s, claimed to suffer from dementia and memory loss. During a press conference held at the time of the FBI's inquiry, Webb appeared bewildered by the sudden intrusion into his home. He claimed to have no understanding as to why the authorities were combing through his property. However, when the name Natasha was mentioned, he did acknowledge some degree of familiarity. And when Susan was brought up, he expressed that he believed they were married. In a rather fragmented recollection, he also mentioned that he was away on a trip when the mother and daughter mysteriously disappeared. The FBI search yielded an unexpected discovery as reported by Webb's live-in caretaker, Terry Lilly. It was stated that law enforcement found a bullet in the wall of the bedroom, allegedly with Natasha's DNA on it, though that has yet to be confirmed. Authorities also removed tiles from the basement floor. Larry Del Webb was charged with first-degree murder of Natasha on October 2, 2023. This was a major development in the case. Notably, Webb has not been charged with anything related to Susan's disappearance, thus that aspect of the case remains unsolved. The fact that Susan and Natasha are still unaccounted for raises doubts about their final destiny in spite of these events. Webb is awaiting trial, and the inquiry is still ongoing. Moving on to the next case. Robert Earl Sanders. A grandpa and his grandson went squirrel hunting on September 10, 1987, in the woods off Block of Liberty Road close to Mount Hope Cemetery in Youngstown, Ohio. Unfortunately, the finding of a human skull and other bones resting on the surface ended their time spent bonding. After being dispatched to the area, the Youngstown Police Department launched an investigation to identify the remains. The investigators were assisted by the Department of Anthropology at Youngstown State University. They were able to ascertain that the remains most likely belonged to a black male who was between the ages of 30 and 44 and who had maybe spent 3 to 5 years in those forests. Unfortunately, no further evidence was available and no leads came to fruition, so the case went cold. The unknown male was named the Youngstown John Doe. In August of 2021, a young woman called the Youngstown Police Department to speak to investigators. Her name is Elisa Yelchin. She had been a student of anthropology in the early 2000s and remembers seeing the skull and bones in the laboratory. Elisa could not get the thought out of her mind that the Youngstown John Doe was someone's child. She wanted to ensure that the Youngstown Police Department continued the investigation and did everything within their power to bring it to a conclusion. Detective Sergeant David P. Sweeney then took the lead on the case. In the latter part of 2021, the remains were sent to the Ohio Attorney General's Bureau of Criminal Investigation in order to extract DNA. Then, the Youngstown John Doe was entered into the NamUs, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, and a new facial reconstruction was created. Detective Sergeant Sweeney additionally went around the city distributing flyers and asking for tips. The decision was then finally made to send some of the remains to Othram Inc. to see if they could generate new leads in the investigation. In January of 2023, Youngstown Police Department received communication from the Othram team that funding was available for the case via the Porchlight Project. The Porchlight Project began in 2018 and is a privately funded organization which assists agencies, specifically in Ohio, with advanced DNA testing and genetic genealogy. Othram was able to successfully develop a DNA extract from the skeletal remains using forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile suitable for genealogical analysis. The leads were returned to law enforcement and further researched by Detective Sergeant Sweeney, the Mahoning County Coroner's Office, and BCI, which affirmed what the genetic genealogy research uncovered, a conclusive and definitive identification of Youngstown John Doe. In February of 2023, it was announced that Robert Earl Sanders is the Youngstown John Doe. He was reported missing on August 13, 1976, a full 11 years before his remains were found in the woods. Robert was only 23 years old when he lost his life. Elisa Yelchin, who is the anthropology student who got the ball rolling on the case, spoke at the press conference. "We have all met someone in our lives that sticks with us. It's just their face, their attitude, whoever they are, you can't forget them. In the early 2000s, I saw my person in a forensic anthropology class. He wasn't sitting next to me, though. Rather, he was in front of me in what appeared to be a lost and found box with the most amazing smile I'd ever seen. I wondered forever who he was. I wondered what he looked like, and it haunted me. Anyone with information regarding Robert Earl Sanders is encouraged to contact the Youngstown Police Department at 330-742-8900. Moving on to the next case. Robert Stow. The Orange County Police Department was called to the Lilchump convenience store, which was situated on Clarkona-Okui Road in Orlando, Florida, just after 7 in the morning on February 3, 1996. That morning, a certain witness had alerted the police to a strange discovery. The witness claims that at approximately 6:55 a.m., he was passing the Lilchump convenience shop when he saw that the lights were off. The store employees would often open around that hour to start sales, so he thought it was odd. The witness turned around and parked close to the store to peek through the windows before attempting to enter to confirm what was happening. He claimed he didn't see a store clerk, which was unusual. A nagging suspicion then made him to contact the police to relay his concerns before driving away. When the deputies arrived at the scene, they found 2 guys from an Amour car company waiting to pick up a cash deposit at the store, but the door was locked. The deputies called the store phone, but nobody answered. They then made a brief rounds at the store and discovered in the parking lot a white car. Deputies ran a license plate check and discovered that the car belonged to the store manager, Terrence Paquette. They called Terrence's residence to confirm if he was home, but they didn't get any response either. There was no way for the deputies to get into the store as it was already locked from the outside. Luckily, another employee from the store who had closed the night before was just driving by when he spotted the police at the front of the store. He then let the deputies in with his own keys. While they tried to open the door, the police discovered a minor amount of blood on the exterior lock. On getting inside, the police found Terrence Paquette, the store manager, on the floor of the men's restroom, already dead in a pool of blood. According to the medical examiner, Terrence Paquette had suffered from multiple stab wounds. He had been stabbed 73 times around his neck, torso, and extremities. His hearts and lungs were severely punctured. Investigators observed a considerable amount of bloodstains around the store and concluded that the person who stabbed Terrence Paquette had also been hurt. There were bloodstains in several locations of the store, particularly on the freezer door, the freezer flap, the lottery machine behind the counter, the key cylinder on the entry and exit door, and the door push bar. The blood patterns in the store demonstrated the suspect's movement throughout the area, from the restroom to the beverage freezer to behind the cash register where money was stolen, and ultimately on the entry and exit door where the suspect most likely fled the scene. According to the deputies, after taking about $1,000 from the safe underneath the cash register, the perpetrator took Terrence Paquette's keys and locked the doors to the store. The question of who could have murdered Terrence bugged the police and his family at the time. Terrence Paquette was said to have arrived at the Lilchamp food store between 5 and 6 in the morning to set up for a 6 a.m. opening like he usually did. Unfortunately, within a few minutes of arriving at the store, he was brutally murdered by an unidentified assailant. The police questioned those who knew him, but nothing much was known about Terrence because he had only recently relocated to Orlando, Florida. He worked 60 hours a week and did not have many known acquaintances. The investigators rapidly followed up on all leads in an effort to identify his killer, but there were hardly any witnesses to the crime. Although they had all the necessary evidence, the investigators lacked the means to put it to use. The blood samples, taken from different locations at the crime scene, were sent to a crime lab, and all samples were determined to have originated from the same unidentified killer. The following year, in 1997, a detective closed the case and documented it that it was pending further investigative leads. On July 22, 2003, a different detective reopened the case, re-interviewing witnesses and obtaining buccal swabs to compare with the suspect's blood. But there were no matches found. On March 17, 2003, an analyst entered the unidentified DNA profile from the freezer door handle into the combined DNA index database, but no matches were found either. Another detective, Brian Savelli, took up the investigation in 2019 and kept working to identify the suspect whose blood had been left behind in various locations of the store. During the course of going through the case, the idea of genetic genealogy came to Detective Brian Savelli's mind. Genetic genealogy uses a known DNA profile to reverse engineer a family tree for the unknown suspect. It became a well-liked new investigative tool in 2018 when the officials in California used it to pinpoint the Golden State Killer. Finally, in March 2021, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement was contacted by the Orange County Sheriff's Office to help with the investigation. To create a thorough genealogical profile that may be utilized to generate fresh leads that could help identify Terrence Pickett's killer, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement hired Othram to use cutting-edge DNA testing. Othram created a thorough genealogical profile using forensic-grade genome sequencing. After the profile was successfully created, Othram gave it to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, whose detectives uploaded the DNA profile into two open ancestry databases, GetMatch and Family Tree. They later created a family tree, and it revealed that the blood samples originated from a person who shared genetic ancestry with a couple, Kenneth Stow Sr. and his wife. Investigators were then led to the couple's 3 children. Authorities started a background check on the 3 children and discovered that one of them, Kenneth Robert Stow Jr., a 54-year-old Eustis resident, had lived across the street from Terrence Pichette in 1996. Kenneth Robert Stow was 28 years old at the time of the murder. Detective Brian Savelli also found out that he had once worked at the Le Champe convenience store. All the puzzles were coming together. In order to apprehend the murderer, detectives got the court order to commence a GPS surveillance on Robert Snow Jr. The GPS device was placed in his vehicle on August 27, 2021, outside of his building supply business. According to Detective Brian Savelli, while following Robert Stow on September 14, 2021, he saw him throw a bag filled with beer cans into a trash can. The bag was taken by the detective and submitted at the Orange County's crime scene unit for testing. Forensics discovered that the DNA on one of the beer cans matched the blood from the beverage freezer door handle in 1996. Authorities arrested Robert Stow using the fresh evidence. When questioned, he acknowledged working at the convenience store, but denied killing Terrence Pickett. Robert Stow is charged with first-degree murder with a firearm and robbery with a deadly weapon. A judge ordered him incarceration without bond. All of Terrence Pickett's relatives have already died, but authorities told several of his associates of the arrest in the case. Moving on to the next case. Roger Scott Dunn. Jim and Mary Sue Dunn had 2 sons when Roger Scott Dunn was born in Lubbock, Texas on February 10, 1967. All of them called him Scott. It was said of Scott that he was a ladies' guy, a joker, and full of fun. The 24-year-old quit the military in 1991 and made Lubbock his new home. He installed unique sound systems in cars while he was employed at MGM Electronics. He loved working on cars, and he had even won stereo installation competitions. He also bought, restored, and resold used automobiles on his own. Scott dated Leisha Hamilton. She was a 28-year-old waitress. On the evening of May 13, 1991, Scott attended a party at one of his friends' homes. Out of nowhere, Scott got seriously ill. He couldn't walk or drive home and slept at his friend's house. The next morning, Leisha came to pick him up so that he could rest in the comfort of his own bed at the apartment they shared at Oakwood Club Apartments at 50-18 24th Street. The day after that, on May 15th, Scott was finally feeling well enough to get back to his work. His car was still at his friend's house, so he arranged for his friends to take him to work. He told Leisha about this arrangement. She made him tea and left for work. When his friends arrived at their apartment, Scott didn't answer. Leisha arrived home later and told his friends that he must have left while she was at work. Scott did not come home that night, and for the next 2 days there was absolutely no sign of him. Leisha then contacted Jim Dunn, Scott's dad who lived in Pennsylvania, and told them that Scott disappeared. Jim Dunn then contacted the Lubbock Police Department to file a missing persons report. Jim told detectives that it was unusual for Scott to leave his Camaro, nicknamed the Yellow Submarine, and his tools at work. When the police arrived at Leisha and Scott's apartment, Leisha immediately told the police that a piece of carpet was missing from underneath the couch. In Scott's bedroom, the police found that missing piece of carpet. It had been duct taped together with the carpet in the bedroom. A piece of carpet had been removed from the bedroom. Along the seam, the police noticed a rusty-colored stain. It was clear that it was blood. There was another large stain on the padding underneath the carpet in one section. The blood on the padding had seeped down to the concrete below. It also looked like someone had cleaned blood off of the baseboard of the wall. The investigators used luminol to test the room. The room lit up. It was obvious that someone, presumably Scott, had suffered a violent attack. Investigators looked at Scott's life and the people he knew to see if anything stood out to them. Scott had a previous arrest for using illegal substances. At age 23, he was arrested in connection with a Domino's Pizza robbery. The police followed up on this to see if anyone might have had reasons to hurt Scott because of the substances or money. They didn't find anything useful. Looking at Scott's relationship with Leisha, investigators found a lot of oddities. It seemed that Scott wasn't able to commit to Leisha as much as she would have liked. 1 month before Scott's disappearance, Leisha had learned that Scott was engaged to another woman. Investigators saw this as a possible motive. Could Leisha have sought revenge against Scott? Scott's friends told investigators something worrisome about Leisha. A family friend of Scott said that Scott was afraid to break up with Leisha. Leisha's ex-boyfriends warned Scott that she could lather herself up into violent, jealous rages. Leisha continued to contact Jim to talk about the case. Jim taped all of their phone calls. For some reason, Leisha didn't really seem that interested in finding Scott. She often talked about his sports car. She even asked Jim if she could have it. Leisha told Jim that she didn't want the car, but needed it. Leisha was clearly getting impatient about having to wait for the car. This was really odd behavior. Investigators learned that Leisha had a criminal record. She had been arrested in New Mexico for embezzlement. Investigators continued looking into the possibility that she was responsible, but then she actually came up with the first suspect. Leisha told Jim that she believed a man named Tim Smith was involved in Scott's disappearance. Tim lived near Scott and Leisha and became infatuated with her. The police went to speak to Tim at his apartment and saw that he was packing up to move. Tim willingly let the police search his apartment. When the police walked back out to the room where Tim was standing, they discovered that Tim had moved a roll of duct tape that was on his bookshelf. Tim claimed he didn't move anything, but the police found it hidden behind some books. The tape was sent in for forensic testing. Using infrared lights to look at different wavelengths and components of the tape, the results were that the tape from Tim's apartment were consistent with the tape used on the carpet in Scott's bedroom. On the side of the tape, triangular green carpet fibers were found, which were the same color as the carpet in Scott's bedroom. Unfortunately, without a body, there wasn't much else investigators could do, and the case went cold. Jim got impatient and set out to find answers himself. He met with a group called the Vidocq Society. It's a group of 82 international forensic experts. The group is a members-only group that meets in Philadelphia to try to solve unsolved crimes. Jim met with Richard Walter, a co-founder of the group, to go over the case of his son. Richard immediately confirmed that Scott is not alive anymore. Furthermore, he was convinced that Leisha held the answers. Richard sent the information to Dr. Richard Shepherd of New Scotland Yard. Dr. Shepherd concluded that Scott's life was taken in his bedroom and had been struck multiple times with a blunt object. He conducted multiple tests and confirmed that with the amount of blood that was lost, no one could have survived. Richard Walter begged the district attorney to take this case to trial. Richard said that they didn't have a body, but had a body part, the blood's connective tissue. Richard Walter noticed that there were unidentified hairs in the duct tape found in Scott's bedroom. It was sent in for testing and was determined to be hair from both Tim Smith and Leisha Hamilton. Smith and Hamilton were finally arrested 3 years after Scott disappeared in 1994. It is believed that Scott's life was taken in the early morning hours of May 16, 1991, while he was asleep. Scott was struck 4 times with a blunt object. Hamilton and Smith tried to clean up the scene but obviously left behind too much evidence. It is believed that Leisha wanted revenge after finding out that Scott had been seeing other women and was engaged. Smith probably helped Hamilton because she manipulated him and he was obsessed with her. They were tried separately and both convicted. Leisha Hamilton was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and Smith was sentenced to 10 years of probation. The jury believed that Smith was involved in helping Hamilton clean up and get rid of evidence, but weren't convinced that he was in the room when the crime took place. It's not clear why Leisha got such a short sentence, in Texas no less, but she had to serve it in full after losing multiple bids for parole. Leisha dropped out of sight once she got out of prison. Frustratingly, neither Hamilton nor Smith wanted to tell police where they put Scott's body. When Jim Dunn of Lubbock Victims Assistance Services learned in 2012 that skeleton remains had been discovered in a sewer system close to Scott's apartment complex, there was a great deal of comfort. Dental records verified that Scott was the source. The Dunns buried him in a tomb beneath a stone that had an engraving of Scott's Camaro on it on June 16, 2012. "I tell everyone that Scott came home for Father's Day," Jim was quoted as saying. Moving on to the next case. Rosemarie Nitrio. Rosemarie, whose real name was Maria Rosalia August Nitrio, was born in Dusseldorf on February 1, 1933, and had a difficult childhood. Rosemary and her half-sister were raised for a while by their single mother after being born to an unmarried charwoman. Her father, who was allegedly a Dusseldorf laborer who refused to pay child support, was unknown to her. Rosemary and her sister were eventually placed in a children's home when her mother was sentenced to prison. And a year later, in 1939, Rosemary was placed with a foster family. A few years later, when she was just 11 years old, she was sexually assaulted by a local 18-year-old man. The horrific crime was covered up, however, and no official reports were ever made to the police despite the fact that everyone in their village knew what had happened and who the perpetrator was. As a teenager, Rosemary entered the world of sex work. She spent her time in and out of juvenile correction homes, but escaped on numerous occasions. Then, after spending 3 weeks in a juvenile detention center for vagrancy, she decided to move to Frankfurt, where she worked briefly as a model and a waitress before eventually returning to sex work. Reportedly, Rosemary began hiding her background while she worked. She learned English and French and took etiquette lessons so she could better fit in with the upper class. This allowed her to attract wealthier, more sophisticated customers, and she became well known for being an excellent conversationalist. Her plan worked, and soon Rosemary was being gifted with expensive cars and luxury trips abroad to the likes of the Mediterranean. She quickly built up wealth, and she used her money to buy herself a lavish apartment and a Mercedes convertible which had red leather upholstery. She would use the car to take her clients to and from her home, In 1 year alone, she earned the modern equivalent of over $140,000. However, it all came to an end when the 24-year-old was found dead in her apartment. Her death came to the attention of authorities when her cleaner reported that she had been unable to get into the apartment for several days and had noticed her delivery of bread was stacking up at the front door. It was estimated that Rosemarie had died 3 days prior. Although sloppy police work and a lack of forensics makes it unclear if this was the case, Rosemarie's cause of death was established as being strangulation with a nylon stocking. Although she also had a head wound, even after her body was interred, the police hung on to the young woman's head for evidence. It was eventually buried with the rest of her in Tus Dorsate. While all of Rosemarie's clothing, including real fur coats and silk dresses, had been left untouched, the modern-day equivalent of around $34,000 had been stolen from her apartment. Although investigators theorized that robbery was the motive behind the crime, no one could fathom why none of her valuables had been taken. This could perhaps be explained by the fact that the perpetrator would not have to fence any goods if they only stole cash. The 24-year-old was not sexually assaulted, and there was no other obvious motive for the crime. Although rumors began that she tape-recorded conversations with her clients so she could later blackmail them. However, this theory has been ruled out as there has never been any supporting evidence. A detective inspector who worked on the case, Alfred Kalk, stated that while officers had recovered a notebook listing the names of Rosemarie's clients, none of them were in massive positions of power to the extent that it would cause a scandal. He claimed that her clientele was mostly ordinary folk and that the highest profile man in the notebook was a bank director. Several U.S. Army officers were allegedly also part of her clientele. They admitted that she'd asked for money so that she could pay to have an abortion. However, none of these men were ever considered suspects. The investigation was known to be hasty and haphazard. The prime suspect in the case was a close friend of Rosemarie's named Heinz Pullman, who reportedly visited her on October 29th, which is possibly the day she was killed. A witness recalled being almost run over by Pullman as he sped past the courtyard outside of Rosemarie's building. Pullman was a 37-year-old businessman whose relationship with the 24-year-old was completely platonic, as he was gay. The most suspicious thing, however, was that he was known to be having financial troubles at the time of his friend's death. However, in the days following, he cleared all of his debts and bought himself a new car. He could not explain to investigators where this money came from and gave conflicting information during questioning, although he eventually admitted to stealing from his employers. Evidence appeared to be stacking up against Pullman. He was known to have a key to Rosemarie's apartment, which aligned with the fact that the 24-year-old's door had been locked when she was found dead. He also owned gray-colored trousers that had a reddish stain on them. While he initially said that it was rust, an analyst determined that it was human blood. Pullman then changed his tune, claiming the stain was blood, but that it was his own because he suffered a skin disease which made him bleed from time to time. He also argued that since he had a key to the home, he could have robbed Rosemarie any time when she wasn't there. Eventually, the 37-year-old was charged with Rosemarie's murder, but he was acquitted in July of 1960 on grounds of reasonable doubts. His defense argued that the authorities failed to measure the precise temperature of the 24-year-old's apartment, which would have been essential in determining the time of death. The blood found on his trousers could not be conclusively linked with Rosemarie either, meaning all of the evidence which had been gathered by police was circumstantial, therefore leaving room for doubts. The prosecution did not appeal this acquittal. Following his exoneration, Holman went on to be cast in the lead role of a movie which was based on Rosemarie's life and murder. However, this action received significant negative backlash, and he was ultimately dropped from the film. He then contacted Soviet authorities in East Germany and offered to sell them the list of Rosemarie's clients as he had them all memorized, but they declined this offer. Additionally, Pullman wrote several magazine articles which detailed the last days he'd spent with the 24-year-olds, but again, these stopped being published when they received negative attention. The only other suspects in Rosemary's case was a Munich grocery store owner whose name was found in her pocketbook alongside the names of several different cities. However, he was shortly cleared of any involvement. Rosemary's story was thought to be outrageous and scandalous by the local media. A failure to solve the case led to further sensationalism and the speculation that high-ranking citizens were trying to stop law enforcement from doing their job and bringing the case to a close. This notion was only fueled when some of the police files in the case went missing shortly after the investigation began. However, these missing files were actually located in police archives in 2013. For a time, there was some speculation that Rosemary's case was linked to the blonde doll case in the Netherlands. Sybil Neumond, a prostitute, was strangled at her house in 1957. There has never been a solution to this issue. Another sex worker from Frankfurt was killed 9 years after Rosemary's death. Unfortunately, it appears likely that Rosemary's murder will suffer the same fate as Helga Matura's case, which remains unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Sabrina Underwood, located in the northwestern Arkansas Ozark Mountains, Huntsville, Arkansas, was a small, tight-knit rural community in the 1990s. In contrast to larger urban regions, the town's character was firmly anchored in its agricultural and historical traditions, and it was a location where ties to the community were strong and life proceeded more slowly. Huntsville's community life in the 1990s was characterized by a strong sense of oneness. The town's social fabric was woven through a variety of communal events, and residents frequently knew one another well. Every year, Huntsville residents eagerly anticipated local festivals, fairs, and parades. These gatherings not only provided entertainment, but also served as opportunities for people to come together and strengthen their community bonds. It is against this rural backdrop that the tragic case of Sabrina Underwood unfolded. Sabrina Underwood, a 19-year-old at the time, disappeared on January 20th, 1991, after her mother dropped her off at the U.S. Highway 41262 near Bear Creek in Boone County. Sabrina was on her way to Calico Rock to visit her boyfriend who was incarcerated at the time. Sabrina's mother never saw her again, and Sabrina's disappearance sent shockwaves through the community. Months of anxious waiting followed Sabrina's disappearance. Then, on April 8, 1991, the town was rocked by a grim discovery. A hunter stumbled upon human bones, hair, a pair of panties, and an earring stud near the Gum Spring Cemetery northwest of Little Rock. The remains were identified as those of Sabrina Underwood, her fate far from the destination she had hoped to reach. Sabrina's demise was initially classified as undetermined at the time, marking the beginning of a painstaking and heart-wrenching investigation. Law enforcement officials worked tirelessly conducting interviews, exploring leads, and attempting to unravel the circumstances surrounding her case. Despite their dedicated efforts, no arrests were made, and the case eventually went cold, casting a shadow of unsolved mystery over Huntsville for years to come. It would take more than 3 decades for the darkness to recede. In July 2022, a pivotal tip emerged, reigniting the investigation. A local attorney with a client incarcerated at an Arkansas state prison possessed a confession letter that was both shocking and chilling. The client, Rick Allen Headley, was already serving a life sentence for the 2018 slaying of his estranged wife, Kirsty Headley. The confession letter contained graphic details of Sabrina Underwood's brutal end, breathing new life into the long, dormant case. Detectives wasted no time in interviewing Rick Allen Headley about the contents of the confession letter. The chilling details he provided would shed light on the brutal crime that had remained shrouded in mystery for more than 30 years. Headley admitted to the crime, and his confession read like a nightmarish scenario that had unfolded in the quiet town of Huntsville. According to the affidavit, Headley's confession painted a grim picture of Sabrina's final hours. He claimed that Sabrina approached him at a gas station and requested a ride. What transpired during that ride would go on to haunt Headley for years to come. In an astonishing turn of events, Sabrina made advances and shockingly demanded money, threatening to accuse Headley of harming her if he did not comply. Headley recounted the moments that would lead to Sabrina's brutal demise in a chilling narrative. After the intimate encounter in his truck, Sabrina informed him that she needed a significant sum of money or she would reveal that he had harmed her. This revelation shocked Headley, and he sensed that there was going to be problems. The events that followed were nothing short of horrifying. Headley decided to drive away, leaving Sabrina behind, but the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on him. He believed that he could not let her ruin his life. It was at this point that he launched a violent attack on her outside the truck. In a shocking and gruesome act, he dragged her into a small cemetery, hidden from the prying eyes of any passerby. The description of the slaying itself is nothing short of chilling. Headley confessed to using a Rambo-style knife complete with a compass at the end to cut through Sabrina's neck. He described in graphic detail how he used a rock to hammer on the knife blade until it broke the bone and severed her head from her body. His intention, he admitted, was to eliminate any chance that Sabrina could ever reveal what had happened to her. Following this horrifying act, Headley covered Sabrina's body with sticks and leaves to hide it from view. He then gathered her belongings and placed them near her remains. The knife and rock used in the gruesome crime were disposed of several miles away, thrown into a patch of woods. At his apartment in Mountain Home, Headley removed his blood-stained clothes, placed them in a trash bag, and took a shower to cleanse himself of Sabrina's blood. The trash bag containing his clothes was discarded in a dumpster behind a mall, after which Headley left the area. Headley's confession not only sent shockwaves through Huntsville, but also brought a measure of hope and closure to Sabrina's family, who had endured decades of pain and uncertainty. The arrest of Rick Allen Headley marks a long-awaited milestone in the quest for justice in the cold case of Sabrina Lynn Underwood. He now faces charges in connection with Sabrina's case, and his upcoming court appearance in Fulton County Circuit Court in late November 2023 is awaited with bated breath by the community. The case is a sobering reminder of the law enforcement community's unwavering commitment and the unbreakable will of small-town communities to secure justice for families like the Underwoods. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with us. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps us bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.